Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, fired up for another opportunity to do what I love behind the microphone and in front of the camera for those who are watching, sharing my thoughts and analysis on all that's happening in the world of sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now, as we get set for the weekend, and even more so for the Met fan like yours truly, tonight in a big-time Game 4 where Jose Quintana is going to be left in his left hand to whether or not he's going to pitch the Mets to a Game 5. We understand he's not going to go the complete 9 innings, but they're going to need some length from him today, considering what happened there last night. And as we recap a rough Game 3, which was pretty much a mirror image to Game 1, but sandwiched in between was a Game 2 where Francisco Lindor led off the game with a home run after an 8-pitch at-bat. And it looked like the Mets were going to take off from that point, and they certainly did in the next inning, to where the bases were loaded after intentionally walking Lindor to get to Mark Vientos, who took that personally, and therefore hit a grand slam to put the Mets from 1-0, and at that point 2-0, to a 6-0 lead. They did have to hang on there as we watched everything unfold, especially in that 6th inning, where it looked like the Dodgers are going to break through and come close to maybe even tying the game for that matter, where a misplayed ball by Jose Iglesias, and then even another, should have been an error, but I get it that Freddie Freeman did block his view, where Pete Alonso, the ball went underneath his glove, and you thought from that point on that the Mets were going to just collapse. I understand that's the other shoe that drops when it comes to being a long-suffering Met fan, but they were able to hold on, and even with Edwin Diaz, of course, dancing through the minefields, as the Mets were able to secure a 7-3 lead to get back to New York, tied at 1, and it was a good feeling because there was no way that even if the Dodgers would have won up 2-0, and granted that they weren't that much of a threat to a Met lead that they had throughout the course of the afternoon, but you certainly felt good going into that game last night, and the crowd was raucous, the crowd was ready, and after a very good first inning by Luis Severino, the second inning was not to be his. And even though Francisco Alvarez played a huge part in that inning, top and bottom, and I'll get to that in a second, by trying to make a play, and I get it. It was a bang-bang, do-or-die type of throw to get the force out, but then that led to not necessarily the floodgates, because thanks to Tyrone Taylor and his Tommy AGS catch out in right center field, colliding with the right fielder Starling Marte, sacrifice fly after the first run had scored, that made it 2-0. And they were able to keep the Dodgers at bay at that point, to where the bottom of the inning, Mets had the bases loaded with 1 out, and Francisco Alvarez, who has just been god-awful at the plate. He's batting, 145? He's gotten 5 hits throughout this postseason, and this was a guy, think about this, people. Alvarez was a guy a couple of years ago going through the system, and when you look at Major League Baseball's prospects, he was ranked number 1, and more so for his bat than for his defense. And even though he made that costly play there, which started the rally by the Dodgers in the top of the inning, but for whatever the reason, that couldn't translate to him trying to be a hero, because not only did he take a call strike 3 there right down the middle, he took 2 more call strike 3s where he is just completely lost at the plate. And sadly, it's not as if you're going to put Luis Torrens there to be the backstop for Game 4 tonight with Jose Quintana, because now's not the time to tinker and now's not the time to fool around, unlike what Rob Thompson did in the previous series when he's bringing in Weston Wilson to play left field and he benched Alec Boehm, and obviously were just simply panic moves by the Philly manager, but that was last series and this is now. So no way that Luis Torrens is going to be behind the plate there tonight for a pivotal Game 4, but for Alvarez, he's got to snap out of it. He's got to forget about getting in the cage. Maybe he just needs to decompress, do some meditation, whatever it is, because not to say that his bat is super reliant in that lineup, but he has just killed the Mets, and in particular last night. And then Francisco Lindor who followed up with the Alvarez strikeout with a strikeout of his own, although it was a wicked curveball by Walker Buehler, who for 4 innings, yes, he did have to dance, shake, bake, move, and do whatever it took to get out of that second inning, and then a mild threat there in the bottom of the third where they had first and second with 2 out. But for Walker Buehler, who had a bunch of swing and misses, and you saw the stats if you watched the game last night against the Padres, he didn't register a strikeout, and I believe he only got 5 swings and misses. But last night, leave it for the Met offense to have 18 swing and misses, and it was the most that he's had since 2021, I believe, before he injured his arm, Tommy John, etc. So Buehler, although he was ineffective, but he did make big pitches when he had to, and therefore had to pass the baton to the bullpen, and all the bullpen did was go 5 scoreless and nary a hit to be found. I believe a couple of hits in the process. The Mets had 4 in the game. And then you had Kike Hernandez in the top of the 6th hit the 2-run homer. And even though the Mets had a mild threat there in the bottom of the 6th, but they were no match for that Dodger bullpen. And right, this is not the Philly bullpen of Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strome and guys like that, Carlos Estevez, to where the Mets just were flailing and feeble and were unable to muster up anything. And then the cherries on top were the Shohei Ohtani 3-run homer in the 8th, followed that by the Max Muncy homer in the 9th. And similar to game 1, where the Dodgers won 9-0, here it is, the Mets lose 8-0, heading into a game 4 where they absolutely, positively must win the game. Now, maybe if it's going to go by what we've seen this series, will the Mets jump out early and then hang on late to win a game 4 for pretty much the swing game of the series tomorrow, which will be an afternoon game, 5:08, heading into the early part of the evening at Citi Field? All I can hope for is Carlos Quintana, who I thought the Mets should have started yesterday, and this is first guess. If he would have started the game yesterday, and even though I get it, back-to-back lefties with Sean Manaea pitching on Monday, but you had the day off, and Quintana is a guy that has to hit his spots and is going to pitch to contact and is a different pitcher than Manaea with his angles and Sid Fernandez. Look him up if you don't know who he is, whether you're a Met fan or not. But for Quintana, we know he has to hit his spots and he's not going to miss bats. But he has been so effective here from late August through the postseason, as evidenced by the 12 innings that he has pitched without giving up a run, or at least an earned run. And for Quintana, if he would have pitched last night, then that would have set him up for a possible Game 7. Or if they would have won the series in 6, you would have had him lined up to maybe even pitch Game 1 in the World Series, if that would have been the case. But now you're only going to see him this one opportunity here. And if you have to use him later on, you could use him, I guess, in a Game 6 in relief, or even Game 7 for that matter, which obviously will compromise. And I get it. You have to win the game before you can even think about the World Series. But had the Severino pitch today, would have had him set up to come out of the bullpen or in long relief, would have been a lot better to me than having Quintana now have to do that if you're going to try to look into a crystal ball if the series does go 6 or 7 games. But for today, they have to win this game. And the bats are going to have to wake up and maybe have a similar blueprint to what we saw there in game number 2, to where they're going to have to attack. They're going to have to attack early. Yoshinobu Yamamoto is your starter tonight. He's probably not going to go no more than 5 innings, so they're going to have to go back into that bullpen. And yes, got to give the Dodger bullpen credit. They have a lot of arms that the Mets have not seen up until Game 3, but I'm sure you're going to see the Michael Kopechs of the world and the Blake Trinans, who the Mets got their first look there yesterday. And Kopech, he's a guy that could be wild, and yes, his arm is electric. And Blake Trinan was a guy that even when he was with the Nationals, the Mets lit up from time to time. So granted, I get it. Different set of circumstances with the roster, but there should be some familiarity with Trinan, considering that he's been around the major leagues for quite some time, where Kopech was a guy that was in the American League mostly. So a lot of the Met batters aren't familiar with his delivery, arm, etc. So the Mets, it's right in front of them. They have to win this game tonight because they can't go down 3-1. I feel that they have a good shot to win Game 5 because Jack Flaherty, for what he did in Game 1, and even though the weather is supposed to get a little bit warmer as you get to the weekend, more so Saturday, Sunday than Friday, but at least it's supposed to be mid to upper 60s tomorrow, where last night you saw the game time temperature was 51 degrees. You're going to have a similar temperature there tonight. Tomorrow will be a little bit better, but I don't expect Jack Flaherty to have a carbon copy of Game 1 where he went 7 innings and gave up 2 hits over that span with 2 walks and 6 strikeouts. I don't see that happening again. So therefore, the Mets will have to get back into that bullpen and get familiar with the arms that are going to be coming out in the middle to later innings. And of course, Game 1, who knows if it's going to be Kodai Senga. If you ask me, it should be David Peterson. Let him start the game. He'll have his full rest, and it'll be a scenario where you'll start him. And if you need to bring in Kodai Senga for an inning plus, then do so. Because what we've seen by these Dodger hitters, they're not going to chase. As evidence is what we've seen here throughout the series, but even more so last night. Because with Senga, he's a guy that with that ghost fork ball, we know a lot of that is going to be out of the strike zone, and the Dodgers, they're going to stand pat. And that bodes well for them moving forward, especially against teams that have swing and miss material, whether it's Garrett Cole in the next round, and that's down the road, of course, or even in a case like Senga, if he does happen to start Game 5. So for the Dodgers, they're going to be patient. They're going to wait out these starters and try to get to that Met bullpen, because as we all know, that Met bullpen is a flat-out disaster. And I get it. You have Edwin Diaz and even Ryan Stanek, who's performed well, but this is a bullpen that you can't even trust at this moment. And now that the Mets are going to need a big performance from Quintana, they're going to need 6 innings. Forget about 5 innings, 5 1/3, 5 2/3. No, give me 6 full. And maybe try to bleed him into the 7th to maybe, if they can stretch him out, to give that bullpen or spare that bullpen of any inflammatory scenarios regarding the Dodgers, because now I'm sure the Dodgers are going to want to go all out today to make sure that they can get a 3-1 series lead and put a stranglehold on this Met team and maybe not have to worry about them having to go back to LA to play a Game 6. And as we know with the Mets, and this is the reason why today's game is important, because I think tomorrow, depending on who they're going to start, if they can rough up Flaherty and get to a Game 6, which that's going to be a bullpen game for the Dodgers. And yes, we could talk about, all right, the Dodger bullpen, their efficiency, etc., but the Mets' only victory in this series, granted it's been 3 games, has been by that bullpen. Or at least going by the starter, where you have a guy that's going to pitch 1 inning or 2 innings, and then they're going to have to rely on their bullpen to carry them through the rest of the game. So tonight, hopefully they could get at Yamamoto, who way back in April, the Mets roughed up. I believe he didn't even get it out of the 2nd inning. Maybe it was the 3rd inning off the top of my head, but you could go back and even check. And Yamamoto, he already got roughed up in his first start, as we've seen there against the Padres, before coming back in that Game 5 to pitch 5 solid innings. And with the weather being the way it is, and who knows how slick the ball's going to be, and even in the postgame with Walker Buehler, he even stated that the cold weather had something to do with the spin rate, and for him being effective, granted that he got into a big jam there in the 2nd inning, and even Francisco Lindor said, yeah, I haven't seen the ball come out of his hand like that. Maybe the weather had something to do with it. So for Yamamoto, maybe that could be to his advantage. That we'll have to wait and see. But one more time, Mets have to get off the deck and get out in front the way they did in Game 2, for me, in order for them to win this game tonight. Because if not, they're going to be staring at a 3-1 deficit, and who knows if they get out of Citi Field alive. I think they will, even if they go down 3-1 with Flaherty. But to expect the Mets to win 3 straight and have to do the back 2 on the road, that is going to be a tall task. Of course, in a perfect world, you want the Mets to win these next 2 games and then go to LA with a shot just to win 1 of the next 2 in order for them to be National League champions. So we shall see. The lineup as it is, Alonso, now you got to wonder whether or not he came that close from hitting a home run last night. I thought it was going to be out, which would have made the game. At that point, I believe that was in the 6th anyway, he flew out. That would have made it 4-2, but that wasn't to be the case. But Alonso's going to have to wake up here. We know Vientos and what he's done so far. Lindor started the game with a home run. You would expect Lindor is going to step up at some point. He can't deliver all the time. And when he got up in the 2nd inning with the bases loaded, it brought me back to last Wednesday hitting that grand slam. But obviously that wasn't the case. But the bottom part of that order is going to need to wake up. I know Iglesias has gotten on base. Alvarez, he's going to need to do something. Tyrone Taylor, I know his batting average is paltry, but he works out walks and he works out good at bats. So you got to keep him in the lineup. But I don't want to put this all on Alvarez, but he's going to have to show you something here, because he's a guy that has power, that has a capability to wreck a game, but he has done anything but. He's actually wrecked his own team's chances with these opportunities that he's been cast upon throughout the course of this series and even in the prior series. So that's what I have there with the Mets. And let's see what's going to happen here. I don't know which Yamamoto is going to show up. Hopefully it's the Yamamoto of game 1 against the Padres, to where the Mets could, like I said, get off to a good start. And in my gut, I think the Mets will win tonight based on Yamamoto maybe not being effective. Quintana, I'm going to have to trust and put a lot of faith in him. I know I've been up and down with him throughout his Met tenure here, but he has been just rock solid, like I mentioned, over the last 6-7 weeks. So I would expect more of the same. And for them to get a win tonight and then tomorrow, like I mentioned, I think they'll get to Flaherty, and I think they'll go to LA up 3-2. Now, I wish I could guarantee that. Of course I can't. But you know I'm going to have the finger on the pulse of this tonight, tomorrow, and then hopefully Sunday at Game 6, because by the time we reconnect on Monday, this series could be over. I mean, think about that. Because by the time we get to Sunday, if there is a Sunday, that's going to be Game 6. And who knows if that's going to be 3-2 Mets up or 3-2 Dodgers up. So by the time we get to the next podcast and the next time I'm sitting in front of this microphone, we could be talking about either the Mets going to the World Series, the Dodgers going to the World Series, or a Game 7 that night. And I can only hope by the time I get to this microphone, I think it's the likelihood of the Dodgers getting the next 2 games as opposed to the Mets going back to LA. I think that the Mets will go back to LA, but the question is, are they up 3-2 or down 3-2? So we shall see. I told you what I said. I think it's going to be 3-2, and away we go. Now, as far as the other series, do I even need to unpack this? Do I even need to break this down? And I'm going to say this. And I get it. People are going to say, oh, here goes JAYREELZ. He's going to get on the soapbox anytime he can attack the Yankees. And no, I get it. These are the teams that you're playing against. You could only go by the team that's on the other side of the diamond, that's sitting in the other dugout. And right, I understand that the American League is not loaded like the National League. I mean, think about it. If the Mets go to a World Series, they're going to have to beat the Milwaukee Brewers, who were 100 games ahead in the NL Central. And not to say that they were world beaters by any stretch, but they needed a Pete Alonso heroic home run in order for them to get to that next round. Then they had to beat the Phillies, who were front runners the whole year. And even though they collapsed in the biggest parts of the previous series, but still the Phillies were formidable and a World Series threat in their own right. And then the Dodgers. Whereas the Yankees, they got to go through a Kansas City Royal team who hadn't been in the postseason in forever, and a Cleveland Guardian team to, let's face it, they're more of an 162-game regular season team than they are a postseason team. And they do not match any type of offensive prowess that the Yankees do. Same even for the pitching, for that matter, as evidence of what we saw with Alex Cobb, who's been a journeyman, and Tanner Bybee, who couldn't even get 5 outs, let alone he was 1 in the third before they got yanked. And here they are, 2 games to none. And I get it, they're going back to Cleveland, and maybe they could save face knowing that they could get back in the series with a win this afternoon. But the Guardians, they are no match for the Yankees. And it makes me wonder whether or not that the Yankees going into the next round, because they're going to go to the World Series. I picked the Yankees at 5. Who knows? They may even sweep. And maybe out of respect for Stephen Vogt and the Guardians, what they did this year, maybe today they'll be out in full force there at Progressive Field and they'll win a Game 3. Perhaps. But again, with the way that the Yankees have performed here, Soto has been Soto, and he's going to get a ginormous payday, as we know. Giancarlo Stanton, for whatever the reason, he's done much better in October than a lot of people have thought, especially in the Yankee uniform. And Aaron Judge, I'm not going to get crazy by that home run that he hit in the 7th inning. I know a lot of people think, oh, he's back. Oh, that's all he needed, so on and so forth. I don't want to hear it. That wasn't a game-winning homer or breaking a tie in the latter parts of Game 2. Let me see how he's going to perform here. Because if he's going to have a situation where it's 1st and 3rd, nobody out, and he strikes out in the 1st inning, then I'm going to say, oh, he's back to the Aaron Judge that we've seen here over the last couple of years in the Yankee uniform come postseason time. So I don't want to hear it when it comes to Judge all of a sudden that the piano's been lifted off his back and now he's going to go on this tear. Let me see what happens here tonight or later this afternoon, and then I could gauge whether or not, all right, he snapped out of it. So that's the other thing. And again, what more can I say? I'm not even going to get into this breakdown of the series of what they've done so far. Because the Guardians, what? Am I going to get into how, I believe, what was it, at 5-2, where they had runners at first and third, and Jose Ramirez came up as the tying run, and what did he end up doing? Grounding out? I mean, please. I mean, yes, you can look at that and say, oh, but were you really worried as a Yankee fan, even with Ramirez up at the plate there, that he was going to tie the game at that point? Absolutely not. I get it that the potential with him going up at the plate and he's their best offensive player, that anything could happen. But still, I never felt in the slightest that Ramirez is going to come through there. And that's only because the Guardians haven't had these type of games. They do not play when the money's on the line, that they're able to stand up and deliver. And yes, we could go back to the previous series, down 2-1 to Detroit, David Fry in Game 4, and then, of course, Lane Thomas. But again, David Fry and Lane Thomas are guys that you're going to be shaking in your boots. No offense to those guys. They're Major League Baseball players. But David Fry and Lane Thomas are not Juan Soto, Giancarlo Stanton, or Aaron Judge. Case closed. So I'm going to stick to the prediction. Yankees in 5. I think the Guardians will win a game. I will say this. If the Yankees win tonight, they're going to sweep. I don't think the Guardians are going to show up for Game 4. Absolutely not. But this series is not going to come back to the Bronx. Might as well just give the trophy to the Yankees right now. And as I've told my loving father-in-law when at the start of this postseason, I said the Yankees have a cakewalk. Oh, no, the Royals are good. They're solid. They're young. They're hungry. Oh, the Guardians, look what they did. Please. It's almost like watching a movie, or it's almost as if you see a trailer for a movie and you already know it's going to be bad before you even watch it. And I get it, that's a terrible way to judge something. You still have to go watch it, see, and then get an analysis and really critique what the movie was about. But you already know. This isn't, as I said on Monday's podcast, this isn't Albert Bell, Manny Ramirez, Jim Thome, Kenny Lofton. This is not the Indians at the time of the 90s where they had a lineup that was literally Murderers Row Midwest. And even that team didn't win anything. Losing in 95 to the Braves, 97 to the Marlins, and as we all know, the 98 Yankees. But even that team, as loaded as they were, they didn't even get to a World Series. So how do I expect this team to get to a World Series? And at least that team had pitching. Now that I think about it, what do they have? Jose Mesa was their closer. What had Chad OJ and Jarrett Wright, I believe, and guys like that who were part of their rotation, but still an upgrade over this rotation. I'm comparing teams here, and I know I shouldn't do that. But anyway, there isn't anything else to say about this series, if you ask me. In fact, I will close the lid on this. If the series is tied at 2-2, wake me up, and then I'll pay attention. Because I don't want to hear that if the Guardians win tonight, and then the Yankees win in Game 4, and then the Guardians, they can blow out the Yankees 25-0 in Game 5. Am I automatically going to think they're going to come back to Yankee Stadium and win 2 games? The Guardians are not the Arizona Diamondbacks of last year. And let me tell you something. What happened last year happens once every decade and a half. So I do not expect that to happen this time around if the Guardians do happen to make it back to the Bronx for a Game 6 or Game 7, that they're going to all of a sudden upset the apple cart and punch their ticket to a World Series. So that's what happened to baseball. Now let me put on my helmet and shoulder pads to get to the NFL. And if you're a Jet fan, I know it's been a rough week. But then again, there has been some silver lining. And part of that silver lining had come from Las Vegas, where the Silver and Black traded one of their players and won Davante Adams after that Monday night Jet loss against the Buffalo Bills, which put them at 2-4. 2.5 games behind the Bills in the AFC East, and now floundering as far as any opportunity to maybe be a fringe playoff team or even a threat in the AFC. But now they bring in Davante Adams, and what do they trade? A conditional 3rd-round pick, no big whoop there. And now Adams, who had this hamstring injury, now all of a sudden is going to magically be in the lineup come Sunday in Pittsburgh, Sunday night NBC against my beloved Steelers. But for Adams, is he now all of a sudden going to be the guy that's going to magically turn the fortunes of the Jets season around, that his hamstring is now all of a sudden healed, and for Adams to now go out there and catch 7 balls for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns there Sunday night against Pittsburgh, and all of a sudden everything's fine in Jetville? I don't think so. That's not to say Adams is not going to make an impact. That's not to say Adams is not going to have his moments. That's not going to say that the Adams-Rodgers duo of Green Bay Packers past from 2014 to 2021, they're not going to revisit a lot of the beautiful things that they did together there in Lambeau. I'm sure that they're going to be able to be on the same page and do that. But again, the Jet defense, good, not great. They got to make stops. And obviously with Greg Zuerlein, who's missing field goals left and right, he's got to execute and also put up points on his end. And even though Aaron Rodgers had a good game there on Monday night against the Bills in a loss, but still, that offensive line is Swiss cheese. It's not a good offensive line. So if Rodgers can't be upright, or if Rodgers is going to be running for his life at 41 years of age with a bum Achilles, how is he expected to get the ball to Davante Adams if he doesn't have enough time back in that pocket in order to pitch and catch with his wide receiver? So, yes, is he an upgrade? Absolutely. Which now Mike Williams, who Aaron Rodgers threw under the bus there after the game on Monday night, saying that he was in the wrong spot when he came to that pass where it was intercepted and had the Jets lose at that point on late in the fourth quarter. And Mike Williams, who now has been, I don't want to say mysteriously, but he's a guy that didn't even show up to practice there yesterday because he had a family issue where it looks like he's going to be on his way out. And if I'm the GM of the Kansas City Chiefs, not to say that Mike Williams is the second coming of Jerry Rice, but considering that they need some reinforcements there, considering Rashee Rice is out, and they're from hunger when it comes to the wideout position, I'm sure that they would pick up the phone knowing from his days in the AFC West as a member of the LA Chargers that, hey, what can we do to get Mike Williams on our team? And remember last year they traded for Mecole Hardman with the Jets to bring him to Kansas City, and all Mecole Hardman did was catch the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl last year. So I would think that the Chiefs are going to probably have the Jet GM and a one Joe Douglas on speed dial to see whether or not they could procure his services to at least have a weapon for Patrick Mahomes to throw to. But I digress. Back to the Jets. Now, who knows? The Jets schedule does lighten up a little bit as they have a couple of road games. All right, Pittsburgh's not going to be easy. Not to say it's insurmountable. And then they don't have a home game until Halloween where they'll play the Texans, which that's going to be a tricky game. But I don't think this is going to be the panacea for all the Jet ills. Now, yes, I'm sure they're going to have their moments, and I'm sure they may have a winning streak ahead. But the Jets right now, if you're looking for them to make the playoffs, they're 2-4. They're going to have to go 8-3 at least minimum the rest of the way in order to, I would say, safely qualify for a postseason spot in the AFC. And that's going to get you a 6 or 7 seed in the AFC, where chances are you may have to play Buffalo again, or even Baltimore for that matter, if that's the case. So, again, Jet fans, not trying to rain on your parade, but I don't know if Davante Adams is going to be the guy that's all of a sudden going to catapult you to a 7-game winning streak and then be a threat to the Bills later on, where I think they play them in Week 14 for the AFC East. But speaking of the Bills and the AFC East, they made a very shrewd trade by bringing in Amari Cooper from the Browns, who obviously are going nowhere fast. And the one pick that I had there, I believe the Browns I had at 7.5 as an over-under. Well, you could pretty much punt that to oblivion because right now they're 1-5 and going nowhere fast. But for them to bring in Amari Cooper, and that's a team that also needed a wideout, and he's a good possession receiver, a guy who's big target there for a one Josh Allen. And I understand that he's not the sexy, whether it be Davante Adams or Justin Jefferson or even Tyreek Hill, guys like that. But Cooper is a solid, if not, I won't say spectacular, but he's a guy that could certainly, if you have him on your fantasy team, and Lord knows I don't play fantasy, he could put up some points for you. So for the Bills, I'm sure that getting him at this time, considering that they just came off of a 2-game losing streak, winning that game against the Jets, and now let's see if they could take off and just run away and hide in the division where Allen and Cooper could get on the same page. So I thought that was a very big trade and a very good move by the Bills, getting him in there and being pretty much Josh Allen's go-to, especially in big spots as the season moves along. And then you had Jerry Jones, of course, got to take the foot out of his mouth, because for him the other day where he's on the radio, what is it? I guess the Fan 103.5 in Dallas, where I believe that's where the Cowboy games are broadcast on. And I don't know whatever working relationship he has with the radio station, with the weekly spot. I don't know if he gets paid. And if he gets paid for that, that's a disgrace. And I'm sure if he does get paid for that, I'm sure it goes to some charity somewhere. But again, Jerry Jones, what are you doing? You do not need to go on the radio. You do not need to be on any radio show, whether it's your own, whether it's the stations, whether it's the team, whether it's a podcast like mine, an independent, it doesn't matter. Because for those people out there that could say, well, he's Jerry Jones, he's the owner, he can do whatever he wants. Okay, if that's the case, how many other owners are going on the radio talking about their team's fortunes? Number one. How about that? I don't see the Rooneys doing that. I don't see the Maras doing that. I don't see Robert Kraft, who you could say I don't want to say is his equal because all the owners are equal in that regard, but considering the success that Robert Kraft has had with all the Super Bowls that he's won, and he's very visible, as we know, and yes, we could talk about a lot of visible owners in the National Football League, but I'm sure for just the even good NFL fan, they can't name all 32 owners. So a lot of them obviously are in the background just signing the checks, and that's it. But for Jerry Jones, he has to be in the spotlight. He has to be all about him, the star, the brand, etc. And I get it. That's what he's been for 35 years as the owner of the star of America's team. But now he has to stop. And I get it. He has yes men in his corner. His son isn't going to say anything. Nobody else on that board is going to say anything. But you know what? It's time for Jerry Jones to pull the plug on these appearances. Because all he does is just make a mockery of his franchise. So, right, let me get to point number 2 because I was talking about that was point number 1. Oh, I guess point number 2 was the paid spot. Obviously, he doesn't need any more money. His grandkids can't spend the fortune that the Cowboys are on because if you haven't been paying attention, just recently the Dallas Cowboys were estimated a worth of not 1, not 2, not 5, not 7, but $10 billion with a capital B. Okay? So Jerry Jones and his comments, for those who didn't see, watch, listen, read, etc., I guess he was put to task by these hosts, and rightfully so, saying that your team has not performed well at home. You haven't shored up your running back position. You got guys like Rico Dowdle and a relic in Ezekiel Elliott, and you could have had Derrick Henry, who for all intents and purposes said he wanted to go to Dallas. And they were unable to get money for him, but they got money for CeeDee Lamb, they got money for Dak Prescott, and they still got to look under the cushions to see if they could pay a one Micah Parsons when it's all said and done. But all he said was like, hey, you guys, and I'm not going to quote him here, but he pretty much in essence said that you geniuses don't have the right to tell me how to do my business, and even if I were to tell you, I'm not going to say it to some guys on the radio. Jerry Jones, stop. You're full of yourself. You're a self-seeking sycophant. I got nothing against the guy, nothing against the Cowboys at all. But enough. And I'm sure my cousin JD, my former radio partner, who bleeds blue and silver, he'd be first in line to get into Jerry's face and tell him exactly what I'm saying. And he's been a Cowboy fan for life. So I don't want to hear it when it comes to, oh, you're being too harsh. Oh, you don't know about the business, JAYREELZ. I don't want to hear it. Enough. Stop. You don't see any of these other owners going on radio shows or going in front of the camera and pointing at me to say, oh, well, this is what's happening with my franchise. And not even just in the NFL. What about the other sports? You see the Celtic owner going up there talking smack? James Dolan, you can never find him unless he's critiquing Charles Oakley or somebody that goes into their building that is going to denigrate the Knicks. So, again, enough of the Cowboys. Let me move on. As far as the games this week, tonight you have Denver, New Orleans. All right, maybe Bo Nix. Let's see if we can get back on the beam there after losing this past week. And it had a nice little stretch. They won 3 in a row before they lost to the Chargers there on Sunday. But the Saints, they've lost 4 in a row, and Spencer Rattler's your quarterback. So good luck trying to watch that game. Obviously, I'm going to be engrossed in Game 4 of the NLCS. But your highlight games this week, in the 1 o'clock window, you have Detroit and Minnesota. That's one that is for the NFC North. We know that the Vikings are 5-0, the Lions 4-1. And I know I didn't talk about this. I didn't go in depth on it on Monday. But for Aiden Hutchinson, and I know he's trying to be the brave soldier, thinking they could come back at the end of the year. But man, that injury was gruesome. Thankfully, it was the fibula and not both the fibula and tibula, although there was reports that both were surgically repaired. So for Hutchinson, who obviously is the anchor of that defensive line, you could argue that whole defense, to not have him is going to be a huge void, and you would have to think that the Lions are going to have to scour the 31 other teams to see if they can get a pass rusher on board, because they're going to need a pass rusher, especially come postseason time. But Vikings, Lions in Minnesota, that is a marquee game at 1 o'clock. Your 4 o'clock game or 4:25 game is a rematch of the Super Bowl with the Chiefs going to San Francisco. Bigger game for the Niners, not to act any revenge. And granted, they lost 2 Super Bowls to them here in the last 5 years. But to me, this is more for San Francisco to win, to get themselves to feel better about themselves. Yes, they beat up on the Seahawks last Thursday night, as we know. But now this is different competition, a team that's undefeated, a team that obviously is not complete, despite the fact that they are undefeated, but we know that they have issues with the wideout position. Travis Kelce is at Yankee games with Taylor Swift. And granted that let's face it, people, I'm sure he's going to have his moments where he's going to be effective and he's going to catch 8 balls for 88 yards and a touchdown. But the days of Travis Kelce really putting an impact on a game is gone. It's over. Kaput. Finished. Because he's not as quick off the ball. And when he catches the ball in space, he's going to get tackled. He's not going to break tackles or break away from the defense. That's not happening anymore. And that's not a knock. He's 36 years old. I mean, what do you expect? And what we've seen here so far, has he had a monster game? A monster game for him is 7 catches for 74 yards. So if that's going to be the case, then all right, fine. But even those games are few and far between. But still, that's a game that a lot of people are going to zero in on. And for Fox to have that game, and that's another issue, should I even bring this up with Tom Brady? So Tom Brady, now it's been official that he has 10% stake in the Las Vegas Raiders, as it was approved a few days ago. But remember, he is a color commentator, as we know, on the #1 broadcasting team for Fox, who has a Super Bowl this year, by the way, with Kevin Burkhardt. But what that means is he cannot be a part of any of these production meetings. He can't show up to any of the practice facilities the Friday or Saturday before the game. He cannot be in any of these production meetings. So all he can do is just parachute into the game that day or that morning and then show up and then all of a sudden just be a color commentator for what he sees, as opposed to maybe getting some inside information. Not that he's going to share that with the folks watching at home, but he can't be a part of any of that. So what good is that? Unless he's on the phone calling coaches on the side or getting in contact with his people in the know throughout the NFL to say, hey, what do you see about the Niners this week? Or what do you think about Brock Purdy? Or whatever it is. I mean, what is he going to do here? Yeah, he's going to have to do his own personal Zoom calls with these guys or coaches or players. I mean, this is what it's going to come to. But again, that's small potatoes. That's not for us to worry about. But it's going to be glaring if Tom Brady comes out and says something throughout a broadcast, and then therefore it's either erroneous or it's inaccurate, or he may think that, oh, look at this formation here, guys, and then all of a sudden it's the wrong formation because obviously he wasn't part of these production meetings. So we're going to have to wait and see how that's going to unfold in the weeks to come. But yeah, we're going to have to deal with that now. Tom Brady is going to be parachuting into these games, not having a complete knowledge of speaking to coaches, players, etc., where obviously part of the homework in becoming that top color commentator is to be a part of these discussions and meetings and so on and so forth. So we'll see how that goes. You know, the Sunday night game is New York and Pittsburgh, the Jets, that is. Other games on the schedule, Seattle, Atlanta. All right, maybe on a 3-star rating, I guess you could say. Houston and Green Bay, another 3-star rating. I know maybe a little bit better than that because Green Bay has played a little bit better. Philly at New York, the Giants, Saquon Barkley's return has not gotten much ballyhoo here in New York. At least maybe starting today, you'll probably hear some press about it into the weekend, but not much has been discussed about Saquon Barkley from what I've seen or gathered. And Carolina at Washington, Vegas at the Rams, Miami at Indianapolis, Tennessee at Buffalo. Yeah, you got games from hunger. And the London game this week. And for those who are going to wake up early, especially on the East Coast, to watch New England at Jacksonville, God bless you. I won't. But now, who knows if Doug Peterson, the coach, and I mentioned this on Monday, will even make it on the flight back if Jacksonville loses this game. They could win 6-5. He'll probably still have his job, barely. But if he comes away with a loss here to this Patriot team, there's no way that Shad Khan, the owner, is going to have him come on board. He's going to have to stop him and say, I'll give you a plane ticket, but you're not going to be on this flight. Thanks, but no thanks. And then your Monday night, you have a double dip again on Monday night. I hate these Monday night double headers. Although the second game is on ESPN Plus, but that goes to what I've been saying throughout. If you haven't been paying attention, whether it's on my channel, YouTube, at JAYREELZ, talking about my 7 reasons why I'm down in the NFL, or even in the case a couple of Monday nights ago when you had the back-to-back weeks of double headers where it's just too much. We just want the one Monday night game. Don't jam it down our throats, NFL. We understand content is king. We understand because of the tie of gambling and fantasy football, you want to show a million games. And if you could, you'd have a game from Monday through Sunday. But enough. As it is, the game that's on ESPN Plus that you'd only stream if you only have ESPN Plus. So if you're looking on ESPN for the game, forget about it. Is Chargers at Arizona. No thanks. I wouldn't watch that if they were playing that in my backyard. Even with a guy like Justin Herbert and Kyler Murray who can be exciting. Not this guy. But yeah, Baltimore at Tampa, that's the main game. It's at 8:15. Chargers, Arizona's at 9. And Baltimore, Tampa, good game. 2 teams, 4-2. To me, I think this is more on Tampa than this is Baltimore. We know what Baltimore is. We know how stacked they are offensively, defensively, but we understand that offense can be a juggernaut. Tampa, on the other hand, Baker Mayfield, he's been able to throw the ball around a lot and has put up some big numbers. Yes, the last game, he had the 4 touchdowns, but also 3 picks. So to me, this is more of a measuring stick for Tampa than it is Baltimore, if you ask me. So we'll see how that unfolds as we get to Monday's podcast. And even though the game won't be played until Monday night, but you get where I'm coming from. Now, as I turn my attention and I stick to football with the college level, and you have a couple of big games this week, but if you didn't pay attention on Monday, if you didn't listen to the podcast, go back to it. Because when I talked about the big game between Ohio State and Oregon and what it meant for the big picture in the grand scheme of things, it meant very little. And you have 2 ginormous games this week. The first one being Georgia at Texas, the number 5 team in the nation playing against the number 1 team in the nation. And what does that mean for the big picture again? Now, Georgia, as we all know, they have the 1 loss to Alabama, and they could lose this game. Obviously, they're going up against Texas and on the road. And if they lose this game, they're going to have 2 losses where a lot of people think, oh, now Georgia's going to be on the cusp or maybe not even make it into the college football playoff. Says who? I think if they lose a 3rd game and they still have to go on the road to Ole Miss, I believe in 3 weeks, where if they lose that game, they may be in peril, but underline, maybe, not definitely. So how I look at it is now, if they get blown out in the game, that could be a huge factor for the committee to look at it and say, well, they did go to Austin and they got their doors blown off, where that could factor in. But if they lose a close game similar to what happened there in Tuscaloosa last month, and granted they were down big in the game, 28-0, 30-7, and they came all the way back to take a lead, but they ended up losing as we know, but still, it's close and in the grand scheme of things. But unless they get blown out here, then that's a big question mark whether or not the committee will look at that or even have to mull over the possibility of Georgia not making it into the college football playoff. Now, we expect this game to be close. I would think because Texas is at home, but I would think Georgia, considering what happened at Alabama and knowing that maybe there's a little bit of that lingering over them, because Georgia, it's not as if they have been world beaters here since that game, but I really feel that this is more on Georgia than it is Texas. Now, Georgia goes in there and wins, let's say, 34-24, huge for Georgia. That's not going to be a knock on Texas. But I think that with the specter of the Alabama loss and knowing that Ole Miss is on the horizon, and with Kirby Smart, you know, he should have his team focused and raring to go here. I could see this being a close game. I would not be shocked if Georgia wins. And I will even go out on a limb and say Georgia will win this game. Because I'm sure he's probably hammering home all week. We saw it happen in Alabama. We ended up losing. We can't afford to lose to Texas, because if we do beat Texas and lose to Ole Miss, there is no way in hell that the committee is not going to take Georgia, or they're not going to leave Georgia out of the college football playoff, knowing that if they beat Texas here, they are going to be a shoo-in and a lock to make it into the postseason. So that's why this game, Yes, is it big from that perspective? Yes. But if Georgia loses and Texas wins, it's not as if Georgia is going to be the odd man out here. And the same could be said for the next big game on the schedule, which is Alabama going to Tennessee. And Alabama had to survive against South Carolina. And Tennessee, there's a big game for them because they still have to go to Georgia later on this year. And Tennessee, that's a team that if they have 3 losses, I don't know if they're going to be able to survive that. Now, a bunch of other teams will have to fall back to the pack if that's going to be the case. But for the Volunteers, let's see them show up and show out to where they'll hand Alabama a second loss. And if they do, still, Alabama's going to be a part of this playoff mix. That's not to say that all is lost if Alabama loses to Tennessee. And, all right, they lost at Vandy, which was very bad. But to lose to Tennessee, not as bad considering they're currently ranked 11th in the country, where Alabama's 7th. So, as I mentioned Monday, and I'll say it one last time, the expanded college football playoff has ruined the regular season. Because whether Georgia loses again, or even if Texas loses, and even if Texas loses another game, you think they're going to get kicked out of the playoff? Absolutely not. No chance. Or even if Alabama loses here and they end up with 2 losses and wins the SEC championship, and even if now that'd be interesting because I still think Georgia would make it, but if Alabama were to face Georgia in an SEC championship and win, beating them twice, Georgia would probably still make it because of their win, especially if they do beat Texas, because obviously if they're going to have 2 losses, they're going to have to beat Texas and Ole Miss along the way. So that's what I mean. Now, let's see how it shakes down. It's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, Michigan and Illinois with 2 ranked teams that are going to go at it. Now, I only bring up Michigan because I don't think Michigan's going to make it unless they run the table here. And, of course, they win a Big Ten championship. That's the only reason why they'll make it into the college football playoff. But for right this very moment, considering they're ranked 24th, I just bring that up because they're playing against Illinois. And Illinois, they have been good, although they've been knocked down a peg there, especially when they lost to Penn State. But we will certainly pay attention to that game and how that's going to fare. And as we all know, as I mentioned on Monday, Texas, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Georgia are your top 5, followed by Miami, Alabama, LSU, Iowa State, Clemson. And to round out the top 12, you have Tennessee and Notre Dame. And then the fringe, BYU, Texas A&M, and Boise State. Obviously, that could change. We'll see what happens with the 2 games that I mentioned here at the top. And let's see how it plays out. I think Alabama will win at Tennessee. I think about the game a couple of years ago at Hendon Hooker, and that was a big game. Maybe Tennessee can win. Of course, they can win. But I don't know. I think Alabama, maybe sweating out that game against South Carolina, will have them set up for a big game at Tennessee. And certainly one that the college football fan will keep an eye on. All right, I'm going to turn my attention. I'll go to the NBA only because we're going to have a season that's going to commence there on Tuesday night where the banner will be raised to the TD Garden rafters and the Knicks come to town, and I'm going to be anticipating that game. And I'm sure a lot of the Knicks fans, I'm sure all Knicks fans were waiting for that matchup, and the Celtic fan as well, because it's going to be a coronation of last season. But once that banner is up and once the players got their rings, that's it. No more celebrating. Back to business. And for the over-under win totals, the Celtics right now are currently at the top spot. I believe that number is 58.5. Let me take a good look at that. And with all the expectations, a lot of people think that they can be back-to-back winners, which will be the first time since the Warriors did it in 2017-18. Granted, that was only, 6-7 years ago? But the Celtics are going to be heavily favored if they're healthy throughout the course of the year. And granted, they're not going to get Kristaps Porzingis back until about December. But if they remain healthy, the whole team is pretty much intact. They should make a run for a second Larry O'Brien trophy. But the Celtics have the top spot, 58.5. The team that is next on that list is a tie between the Denver Nuggets, the Knicks, the T-Wolves, and the Sixers. 52.5. And I overlooked the Oklahoma City Thunder. They are 55.5. That's a big number. And they may be able to eclipse that. Now, of course, I will have my over-under number totals during my NBA preview next week. And it's going to be a separate preview. It's not just going to be mashed into the Monday podcast. I'll release that Tuesday morning. But for the rest of the numbers here, Sixers, 52.5. Now, granted, I picked them as an under last year, and I believe that number was 48.5. A lot of that was because Embiid was out 2.5 months of the season, but 52.5. And as I'm sure you heard or read, Embiid is not going to play the rest of the preseason, which to me, that's a question mark. Not to say that they have to play him or they should play him, but if they have to rest him throughout, and even with him losing 20 pounds or whatever it was this offseason to get his body ready for a long, rigorous 82-game season, we understand he's not going to play 82 games. He's probably not even going to play 62 games. I'm sure he'll probably want to get to 65 because then he'll get the All-NBA nods as far as him being first team All-NBA and qualifying for that. I'm sure that's going to be his goal. But with Embiid, he's a lumbering guy. He's a guy that has, as crazy as it's going to sound, he missed, the first 3 years of his career? And you would think that he would have quite a few more miles left on his odometer, but he does not. And granted, he's won an MVP 2 years ago, and we know he's a dominant player, but can you trust his body to wear out in a 3-month stretch from April to June to get to an NBA final? Woo, I don't know about that. But anyway, back to the over-unders. Other teams of note. Lakers, what do you think they stack up? 45.5. Nuggets, I mentioned 52.5. What are the Mavericks, the Western Conference champ? 50.5. How about the Memphis Grizzlies? 45.5. I say Memphis only because John Morant's back. Golden State, 43.5. What about some other teams? Orlando Magic, 47.5. Let's go through it. Atlanta, 35.5. Brooklyn, 21.5. And I think that's the lowest number of all. Yes, it is, because the second closest number to 21.5 is the Pistons at 22.5. You have the Jazz at 28.5. You have the Raptors at 30.5. Wizards, 22.5. Those are the low-end numbers. Then you have Hornets, 27.5. That's another team in the 20s. Other than that, I can't get a real good feel. Trailblazers, 22.5. I missed that one, too. Other than that, I don't have a real good feel for any of these. I know the Spurs, 35.5. Could Victor Wembanyama, and with Chris Paul there, I don't know. Bucks, 51.5. I don't know about the Bucks. That Dame Giannis experiment. And I get it. They changed coaches. Doc Rivers. Rockets, 42.5. That may be an over. I'm trying to tip my hand here. Cavs, 47.5. And last year I was 5-1 with my NBA picks. So listen, if I could pat myself on the back for any of these over-unders, baseball I was 3-3. The hockey last year I was 2-4. What else? NFL last year, I think it was 4-2. This year I'm going to be a disaster. You know what? I could even go to that right now, my over-unders. Atlanta, over 8.5. That's looking okay. The Bears, they played well recently, although they beat up on bad teams. 7.5. They just need to win 4 more. Tampa, 6.5. That's looking good. My overs look good. My unders, Indy, 7.5. No, wait a minute. I picked 4 overs. Of course, Cleveland. The 2 unders I picked were Indianapolis, 7.5 to 3-3. Pittsburgh, 8.5. I picked them as an under, and they're 4-2 right now. But remember, that second half, I pretty much predicated that on their second half because, as I said on Monday, and that's why these next 3 games for the Steelers are huge. They play the Jets and Giants back-to-back primetime games, Sunday and Monday night, and then a date with the Commanders, which that's not going to be easy. And then the last 8 games, 6 in the division, and the other 2 games, home to Kansas City on Christmas and at Philly where they never won. That's why I think they're going to be under 8.5. So that's what I have with the NBA. I'll talk more about that on Monday. And then to wrap up here with the NHL, and I have to start off by saying this. I don't know if you saw the tribute a couple of nights ago with Johnny Gaudreau, the former Columbus Blue Jacket, as we know, tragically killed in a bike accident with his brother there in late August in South Jersey. And the Blue Jackets had their first home game the other night against the Panthers. And obviously, with everything leading up to that, the 13-minute moment of silence, well, 13 seconds, I said 13 minutes. JAYREELZ, that's a little bit too long if you ask me. The 13-second moment of silence prior to the anthems. And then when the puck dropped to start the game, They just dropped the puck, let it sit there for 13 seconds in honor of their former player. And that was reminiscent to when Kobe Bryant, when he was tragically killed in that terrible helicopter accident, to where the first game back in LA, Portland against the Lakers, both teams, of course, with the numbers being 8 and 24, retired in the rafters there at the Staples Center. How, I forgot who won the tip, but whichever team won the tip, they took an 8-second backcourt violation, and then the other team took a 24-second shot clock violation, which was a tribute to the Black Mamba and his numbers. So I thought that was beautiful, and even beautiful to know that the Blue Jackets did the same in their own right, and the Panthers as well. So that was just a wonderful tribute. If you didn't watch, it's on YouTube. See it. It's certainly moving, and one that, just in the light of his death, was one that will certainly ring in the Columbus area for the rest of this year. Now, on Monday, I talked about the Edmonton Oilers, how they're off to another slow start, 0-3. Well, they broke that streak as they beat the Flyers there 2 nights ago on Tuesday. Well, now there's another team that was expected to do big things. And not to say that after 1 week, might as well just forget about them. They're not even going to make it to the postseason. But the Avalanche, and even my Islanders were a part of this losing streak. The Avalanche have started off their season 0-4, including a 6-2 loss to the Islanders. Who is this Islander team with 6 goals on the road? And for them to be outscored in the 4 losses, 13-25. And wake me up, Nathan McKinnon. Wake me up, Cale Makar. Wake me up, the rest of the Avalanche team, because the season has begun. So I'm sure they're going to break that tonight, whenever their next game is. I'll take a look to see who they have next on the docket. But that is a bit of a surprise to know that the Avalanche have gotten off to a very sluggish start. And the Avalanche, like I mentioned, 0-4. And I don't think all those games were at home. I think they had one of those games on the road. Yes, at Vegas, but they lost to Columbus and then to the Islanders and then the Bruins last night on national TV. Now they have the Ducks coming into their building tomorrow, so let's see if they could snap that 0-4 start to where they could get back in the win column, or get in the win column. Not even back, because they're not even in the win column if you can't get back to it. But you have the Dallas Stars, flying start. I picked them to go and win a Stanley Cup this year. They are 4-0, and I should have picked them as an over. I should have known better. As opposed to the Calgary Flames, because that was one team that I picked as an under, and where are they currently at? 4-0, one of the 2 remaining undefeated teams, and clean undefeated teams. Not a team like the Rangers, who are 2-0-1, but a team that's 4-0, Calgary, flying start, and their number was 81.5 as far as their point totals. I picked them as an under, and looking not good as of right this moment, but as we all know, it's a very long season, and for both Dallas and Calgary, good starts to them. And other than that, there isn't really anything else to discuss. I could talk about the goaltender of the Minnesota Wild, and one Philip Gustafson scored a goal, the first one in Wild history. Granted that they've been around, 25 years in the NHL, but he was able to get a puck there, and against the Blues a couple nights ago, I think it was last night, where shot it over the defense, where the net was empty, and right into the goal to seal a Minnesota Wild win. And we haven't seen that a lot over the years. I know there was a time where you saw that quite a bit. Ron Hextall, after Billy Smith was credited with the first ever goal, but not that Billy Smith had swiped it into the net, similar to what Ron Hextall did back, I believe it was in '87 against the Capitals. It was a situation where Billy Smith cleared the puck, and because it was misplayed by Rob Ramage, this actually happened in Colorado against the Rocky franchise, who are now the New Jersey Devil franchise. A little history for you guys out there, and gals, of course. But we've seen it over the years where goalies have scored. I believe Martin Brodeur, and just recently, off the top of my head, was there a guy who recently scored a goal? I know last year somebody did, but again, a very rare and seldom occurrence in the NHL. So if you haven't seen that, I'm sure that's on YouTube as well. So you want to say, hey, how does a goalie score a goal? Well, Philip Gustafson, Minnesota Wild, just type that into your search browser, and I'm sure that'll pop up. But that's what I have with the NHL, and that's what I have with the podcast, people. Nothing else to discuss, nothing else that's on and popping going on as we get through this month of October. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, people, I implore you to please Subscribe, rate, review on whichever podcast platform you're on, Apple, Spotify. You can even go to the website, JAYREELZ.com, and also on YouTube, at JAYREELZ to watch the podcast. You can also watch on Spotify too. So you have both avenues that if you want to see in living color, yours truly with the facial expressions and the hand gestures and all of the craziness that ensues over the course of this hour as I'm talking sports, please do so. And even the YouTube, go subscribe there. I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following on my socials: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just the number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com is the email. One more time, people, I'll be more than happy to follow up with any of your queries that you want to throw my way, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. This is why I quit my 9 to 5 to pursue this full time. And it's been over 8 months. And yes, I do have some affiliates. If you haven't listened at the top, especially on Apple or Spotify, but go to betterhelp.com for your mental health needs. If you go betterhelp.com/JAYREELZ, you'll get 10% off of your first month. And it's very easy, people. You fill out a questionnaire. Somebody will get back to you in 2 days. You could be linked up with a therapist. And if you don't like that therapist, you can go elsewhere. So please, betterhelp.com/JAYREELZ. Type that in, 10% off of the first month. Trust me, it works for me, and it'll certainly work for you to open up to a therapist and just share what's going on in your life. It's very important as we try to deal with the routine, the day in and day out of just trying to practice the art of living. And also Olipop Soda. How can I forget Olipop? Not only quenching your thirst with the classic flavors, cola, root beer, cream, ginger ale, lemon lime, but they also have funky flavors: cherry vanilla, strawberry vanilla, banana cream, also watermelon lime. Yes, and on top of all that, it is less sugar, only 1 gram a teaspoon per serving, and none of those ingredients, the high fructose corn syrup and all those other ingredients that you can't pronounce. Yes, if you go to drinkolipop.com, you'll save 15% off of your order by typing in the promo code JAYREELZ at checkout. That's right. Tell your family, friends, foes, frenemies, buy a case, buy a couple, buy a dozen. Christmas is coming. Share them as gifts. Why not? Do so. And I got a couple of other affiliate links coming down the way, so stay tuned. One more time. Independent, full-time content creator, podcast host, producer, etc. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA, as I like to say, with nothing but my thoughts, opinions, critiques, analysis, praise on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.